Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order, and I would ask Ms. Cadell if she would call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Castillo?
Here.
Ms. Gill?
Here.
Ms. Litton?
Here.
Mr. Reitinger?
Here.
Ms. Russell?
Here.
And Mr. Webb?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, rise for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Someone will please move adoption of the agenda, please.
So moved.
Just a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll move on into budget work session number 3. And the first item is the review of the superintendent's goals. So I turn it over to Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for all being here tonight. Get our picture taken. So you clean up very well, I might add, too. So thank you very much. This is the time of year where, as promised, when we work through the evaluation component of the superintendent position, that I was going to bring to you some updated information about the work that I'm doing towards the school division goals for the year. And as a reminder, just in terms of those goals that we've created, one is about international baccalaureate programs, making sure that we're world-class and making sure that we are the best pre-K-12 international baccalaureate school division in the country. The second really is about making sure that we are taking care of all of the students that we're seeing through multi-tiered systems of support, which I've described before. The next is around really thinking about best instructional practice and making sure that we're working in that best instructional practice to meet the needs of all of the students that we have, regardless of who they are. And then lastly, we have an operational goal as well. So tonight, what I'd like to do is spend just a few minutes kind of going through each of those goals with you and give you a sense of those actions by which I believe that we're making some progress. The other thing that I hope that you'll see as part of this presentation is where it's knit together with respect to what the budget process and how that has played out. Because everything in these everything that is in these superintendent's goals are tied specifically to the triennial plan, which has been the basis and foundation for our budget. So let me just begin with the goal 1 of the International Baccalaureate Program. First is that you may recall student-centered teaching and learning was a big piece of our triennial goal. And underneath that student-centered teaching and learning, there were a number of strategies. And this one specifically speaks to strategy number 1.2, which is ensuring that all of our students develop the critical thinking and creative problem-solving skills through the International Baccalaureate Program. It gives me just a minute to sort of pause and reflect together with you and a little bit out loud around what does that mean for our system. And I think one of the things that's become clear to me through our conversations from board to superintendent, superintendent to board, listening to the community throughout the time that I've been here, is that there is this very firm belief that all of our students, regardless of whether they're in special education, whether they're ESOL students, whether they're general ed students, whether they're advanced students, we want all of our kids to graduate from our schools with that profile of a graduate that reflects the values of the International Baccalaureate Program. We want students that are creative problem solvers. We want kids that are critical thinkers. We want kids that can communicate effectively. And as a consequence of that, my work here really relates to how do we ensure that for all of our kids, whether they're in the PYP program, the middle years program, or the DP program. And it isn't until you differentiate into the middle years program and the DP program, a diploma program, where students have more choice in whether they're going to participate or not. So as a consequence of that, one of the things that we have to do is revisit how the structure and the form of all of our instructional programs here to make sure that we're incorporating the elements of the International Baccalaureate Program into everything. So for example, if I'm a special needs student who has a small class for English language arts with a special education teacher, that special education teacher should be utilizing strategies consistent with those strategies that are deployed in the International Baccalaureate program, because students that are in special needs classes need to be able to problem solve, need to be able to communicate, critically think, and the like. So really what we're talking about is creating a culture and an environment across the schools, all of our schools, that allow all of our kids to access the International Baccalaureate program. So when you hear questions, and it comes up once in a while in our community, how does IB impact or affect my students because they're not in a diploma granting program? I hope that our response collectively over the next several years can be, here's how it impacts your student. Regardless of what class they're in, we're going to use these qualities associated with the profile of the IB learner, and we're also going to use the approaches to learning in all of those classes. So tonight, one of the things you'll see under the sub-goals or the action steps in the priority 1 is that by June of 18, we are going to explicitly and purposefully incorporate those approaches to learning in all grades and in all classes. And one of the ways that we'll find some evidence around that is being able to walk into a class and see where those approaches to learning are being evidenced, being able to talk with teachers, being able to talk with students and saying, talk to me about how you're approaching this work. And so with the support of Lisa High and the curriculum team, along with our CTLs, our collaborative team leaders in the schools, they are working at revising curriculum documents in our PYP program, MYP program, and DP program syllabi to really identify specifically where those approaches to learning are. So some of the other actions you're seeing that we've put up here is that those IB coordinators are meeting with steering committees and instructional committees and leadership teams to really look at, again, how those ATLs fit in. You're seeing a real redoubled focus, I think, on our part internally and externally to revisit how are we looking at levels of inquiry with respect to professional development and professional learning for our teachers. We are supplementing, as many of you know, we've been doing exhibitions of learning in 5th grade for a while, but we're now supplementing those with our personal projects in 10th grade, and this is the first time we'll have those personal projects. Those of you that have 10th graders around the table, Ms. Litton, know
He's excited.
sort of how our students are experiencing that, right? And that's really exciting for us. It is a first time out with these personal projects. We have a really excellent personal project coordinator here in the room with us tonight. Thank you for being here, Mr. Kelly. But he has worked very hard and diligently with his students to make sure that they're prepared for that 10th grade project. Some of the other things that we're looking at is we are talking about secondary assessment and training around how do we assess student work based on the approaches to learning and the IB program. If we're asking students to think critically and to problem solve, and to meet a standard, does our current evaluation process meet that expectation? Because one of the things we know is in a traditional grading situation, to be able to say this student met X percentage of the content doesn't really measure very well whether or not a student can critically think or problem solve or communicate. So we've got to sort of step back and say, what is it that we want to measure? And then how do we measure that? Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do in our grading systems is communicate with you, the parents, and with our community, how are our kids doing on assessments. And then lastly, our elementary teams have been reviewing their planners to look at vertical alignment. And this is something that is not a new concept or a new idea, but it's relatively new to City of Falls Church schools. For example, Mount Daniel and Thomas Jefferson are doing professional learning together, and they're comparing their work side by side so that we're able to more adequately bridge students between first grade and second grade, or soon to be second grade and third grade, and seeing how we vertically align moving up the system into middle and into high school. So the next priority is the student-centered teaching and learning. Focus on MTSS, which is the multi-tiered systems of support. And again, just as a reminder to all of you, if you think about a triangle, right, the bottom tier, if you think of it in 3 tiers, the bottom tier of the triangle is tier 1. That's where all of our kids are, is in tier 1. And that's where best practice, first instruction happens. That's where we're providing some intervention as students need. But as students struggle, then they move into tier 2. And that tier 2 is a smaller core group of students that need an extra kind of support. that maybe that core teacher can't provide in that particular classroom that the student is in. And if a student continues to struggle in tier 2, then they would move up to tier 3, which would be the top of the pyramid, which is our most impactful support that we provide. So some of the things you'll see in strategies is one is to ensure that we're providing equity and access to all of our instructional programs and resources. And by having a tiered system that says if all of our students are in tier 1, that instantly provides that equity, but access means something different. So when students are struggling to access the curriculum, then we move into tier 2 and tier 3 so that we can provide them that extra support. We're empowering our principals to really work collaboratively as instructional leaders to really think about how they provide that equitable process in the schools. And one of the things that we've done just functionally in terms of supervision is that our principals now supervise their assistant principals, for example. So that is new to the City of Falls Church. And I think it's really important so that those assistant principals can also feel empowered to work with teachers and report back to the principal who's running the school. And then lastly, making instructional program decisions that really measure the performance of those student populations that we would consider special populations. So we're talking about specifically special education students, students that are in poverty, and students that are English language learners or our LEAP students. Those students we know need extra support in the learning process, just like all of us, right? We all don't learn at the same time and at the same rate of speed, and all of us need a variety of different interventions, some more than others, around certain concepts and skills. And so for us, it really is about providing that extra layer of support. So some of the actions you'll see here are weekly and bi-weekly meetings where we're actually utilizing data to drive decision-making with respect to who needs academic support, who needs behavioral support, and we're providing that through targeted instruction, targeted intervention, and some remediation. I would like to ultimately get out of a remediation model, and the analogy that I think about there is like formative assessment versus summative assessment. When I think about formative, we're working with somebody, we're bringing them along, and we're giving them the support that they need so that when they get to that assessment, they don't fail the assessment. A summative assessment in a non-formative way is you're going to take the assessment, and if you don't pass it, we're going to come back and we're going to remediate you. I think our goal is to really think about how do we intervene on behalf of kids before we get to a place where they fail. And so the analogy I think of is, formative assessment is to a physical exam as summative assessment is to an autopsy. They both give you really good information, but there's only one you can do anything about, right? And so we really want to be in that physical exam environment where we're checking in with kids, taking their temperature, seeing what are your symptoms and how can we fix some of these symptoms so we get to the end, you'll be ready to rock and roll. You'll also see some of our instructional teams are developing really high quality tier 1 practices, and we put in your folder tonight a mock-up of a poster that we are thinking about, that we're putting together to talk about a student environment, student-centered learning environment, assessment of students' learning, and then how we plan and teach for learning, all associated with high-quality Tier 1 instruction. So you'll see things like we want engaged and challenged learners. We want equitable, inclusive learning environments. We want effective classroom management. And then with assessment, we want it to be balanced. We know that not every student should get a 50-item multiple-choice assessment every single day, but we can do a fist to 5. How many of you get it all the way? Give me 5. How many of you just don't get it? Give me 1 finger or a fist. An appropriate finger would be nice. Things like self-regulated learning, making sure that we set goals with kids and help them learn, and then thinking about the IB approaches to teaching and learning, and that's around inquiry, conceptual understanding, thinking in a global context and local context, and an effective teamwork. Some of the other things you'll see are the MTSS teams are receiving support on academic and behavioral components from the MTSS coach, and that's Summer Manos. And some of you are familiar with Summer's work, and she does an outstanding job. So goal 3 then really gets into and digs in further, I think, around the special populations. And here again, we're talking about equity of access, making sure that all of our students have access, empowering principals, and then making those instructional programs. But the actions are slightly different. So here you will see in the actions things like providing the second bullet there. For example, 33 teachers and specialists received the Excel, which is expediting comprehension for English language learner training. So we're talking about sheltered instruction there. We offer after-school clubs. A lot of it is picked up by at the cost and expense of the school division, and thank you very much for providing some of that to our LEAP students. Our administrative teams really are looking at best practices in Tier 1, and we're identifying who are those special students and how are we addressing them by name and by need. So we know now who our kids are that need that extra time and support. They're not just an aggregate number, and we can figure out how to diagnose and intervene on their behalf. And then lastly, our instructional staff are attending conferences, they're working with each other, and bringing that back to their instructional teams. So those are the 3 goals that are specifically associated with instruction that we've been working on as part of our goal setting around the superintendent's goals. The next is the operational goal, and this is goal 4. This one's a little bit different. And I don't want to give it short shrift because we know that we can't do the instructional components if we don't have a really strong operational side of the house. So when we think about operations, we're talking about human resources, food service, transportation, budget and finance, HR, and the like. So here you're going to see things like by 2020, our operational processes are going to be aligned to our triennial plan. That we're going to try to find efficiencies. We're going to look at industry standards and we're going to benchmark against those. All of this, again, is sort of new, so we need to develop some benchmarks as a consequence of that. So one of the evidences of effectiveness for us is the completion of formal and informal surveys and interviews to determine business operations by department. So our first 2 departments that we've really spent some time with are transportation and our food services. And here you'll see some of that reflected in the action. So as part of our budget process, one of the things that how operations supports in many ways our instructional program is that we've reviewed those instructional programs and repurposed positions where we felt like they were more adequately utilized. And one of those examples is the LEAP program. We recognized quickly that we were overstaffed in the LEAP program, and it would make more sense for us to pull one of those teachers out of the school and put it into a support role so that that person can help train up those other LEAP teachers that are out there. We're updating our school sites to be, and our local website to be 508 compliant, which is the ADA accessible requirement, and John Brett has been instrumental in making that happen. Right now, Richard Kane is in the middle of developing performance assessments based on benchmarks from other systems that he's looked at. So he's given us some information about the number of students that he serves daily, the number of free and reduced students, our meals per labor hour, food costs, and as they relate to percentages of revenue. So we're really trying to take a deep business dive into the work of food services. And lastly, we're looking at transportation also to help set those benchmarks. And we're looking at operations, we're looking at staffing, we're looking at overall structure around schedules. We're looking at our fleet, the age of our fleet, and then looking at, again, some benchmarks of cost per student that we transport as well, because we think that those will be good metrics. So those are some of the actions that are keeping me and the team super busy on the central side and on the school side that are really supporting those 4 goals that we are really excited to be working on behalf of the school system, and again, that come right out of the triennial plan. I think one thing that I said at the very beginning is I hope that you can see the tie to the budget conversation around these goals. So, for example, when we ask for a school psychologist, when we talk about needing another school counselor, when we talk about needing a special education teacher, when we talk about needing someone who can lead us in the PYP program, those are all tied directly to these goals and these outcomes that we have for our staff. And at the bottom line, our staff is doing the really heavy lift and the really hard work around this. And so we have an opportunity as a consequence to compensate them appropriately for their hard work. So in a nutshell, that gives you a little bit of information about the work that we've been doing on behalf of the superintendent's goals. Our next steps are that it was raised recently that maybe we should go into a closed session at some point in the next couple of meetings, and I'll leave that to the chair and vice chair to talk about evaluation, and then from there, you all will do a final evaluation of me, my first annual evaluation with the school board, and I look forward to continuing the conversation and the dialogue. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over for any questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noonan. Any members have any questions for Dr. Noonan? Mr. Castillo?
Well, thank you, Dr. Noonan. It's a good, ambitious list of goals. I was just wondering, with respect to some of your goals, if we walk into a classroom a year from now, what do you think we'd see that will be different as a result of these initiatives?
Yeah. One thing I think you'll see is, and this is it's an interesting question, because I don't know that you could walk into one class and see a lot of differences immediately, but I think if you walked into multiple classes of the same content, some of the things you might see would be an exploration across that team of best practices for curriculum and instruction. In other words, you'll see not traditional setups, for example. You'll see engaged kids. You won't see perhaps as much lecturing as you've maybe seen in the past. You'll see, the one thing I think you won't see, but you'll be able to ask, is asking kids, what are you learning about today? Tell us about how you're being assessed and evaluated based on what you're learning. Talk to me about how does this work connect to the IB program that you're a part of? How does this connect to the learner profile? Those are the things that I want our kids to be able to answer really articulately, because at the end of the day, we want these kids to be able to say, I'm a critical thinker, I'm a problem solver, I'm an excellent communicator, and here's how I can show you how I do that. So those are some of the things that I hope that we'll continue to be able to see, and I think we see it in pockets. And I think we have pockets of excellence. I really want to equalize the excellence across the system. And the way that we can do that is by sharing and learning from each other.
Thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Reitinger?
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. I thought that was very helpful. And as we've discussed before, although they're captioned as the superintendent's goals, they're really, since you're the head of the school system's goals. One of the things, we don't have future agenda items on the topic tonight, but either now or in a future agenda items discussion, I'd like to sort of think about is going through, it's great to have a summary presentation, but each one of the 4 goals that you went through probably deserves a deeper dive. So I'm just wondering if we could, in a series of future work sessions, do a relatively, or at least a deeper dive into sort of each of the goals, so that we would spend one work session going specifically into the IB program and spreading that across all groups. One on multi-tiered systems of support, another on special populations, and a final one on operations, to sort of disaggregate it to some extent so we could spend some more time thinking about each of them. One of the things that I've heard some members of the board talk about Mr. Castillo, I think longer than I've been on the board, we want to spend more time on academics and making sure that we've got the best school system possible. So at least for me personally, I'd love to drill more into the goals, to answer more deeply some of the questions that Mr. Castillo was raising. What does this mean in practice? Where's an illustration of where we would see this, as opposed to going through and what must be a survey presentation of what's happening across all the different pieces.
I think all of us would sort of welcome that opportunity to be able to come and talk about our work. I know Summer has done some incredible work with MTSS, for example, and she would love to, I won't speak for her, but I know she'd love to come and talk. And I know Kristen and I know Richard would love to come and talk about what he's done. So I think we definitely can kind of pull some of that together if everybody's open to it.
Yeah. I think that would be a good something to do, just to kind of give because you always hear in the community, particularly around the IB program, of some wanting a little bit more information of why do we do it, why do we continue to do it, why have we expanded it in the ways that we have. So I think that would be a good something to in a future work session, kind of do a little bit deeper dive in, and definitely I think staff would appreciate the opportunity to talk up their particular areas a little bit more.
Anytime we get to highlight the work we're doing, I think we love it, and we'd love to bring some school folks in to share too how some of the work's translating. And I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is that my experience has been in systems that struggle, they have different goals every single year. And you end up with what some might call initiative fatigue. I would really like for these goals to be transformative and be longer-term goals that really get us to where we want to be. And I think we've picked the right work to do that in, around IB and all meaning all, and figuring out how we can really organize and operate well. So I say that because we'll do a deep dive. And then perhaps next year we'll do a deeper dive because we'll learn more about what we don't know and how we can even get better from there.
Mr. Castillo?
And I would third that, because I think one of the hard aspects of IB is how we teach is what we teach is really what it comes down to. And that conveying how a process, I think, is intuitively harder to grasp and to see a process develop. So the more you can bring examples of that home, I think the better off we'd be.
Yeah, and I think part of it's cultural, and moving away from I'm a teacher of content to I'm a teacher of kids. And that's not to suggest that that's where we are, but I do think that there are pockets in every system where people think I teach math. Well, I would push back and say you teach kids. So let's talk about what that looks like in the context of a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old, and how do we play that out?
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nene.
Thank you.
Next, we will move into budget discussions.
And it's time for me to make a statement, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Anderson.
I have consulted with the school board attorney and am making the following disclosure of interest pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3112B1. Pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3115H, I have a personal interest in the school board budget in that my spouse is an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and I am therefore a member of a group of 3 or more persons affected by budget decisions. I am able to participate in our discussion and transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Turn over Dr. Nene.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I turn it over to Ms. Michael to do a last budget update before you all make some decisions tonight, I just want to preface the conversation with sort of where we started. And I remember a couple of weeks ago standing at the podium, actually over a month ago at this point, standing in front of the podium saying to you from the very beginning that what I'm proposing, I believe, is a responsible and responsive budget. And as I said that, I was saying that in the context of knowing that we are building a new high school, that our voters in the city of Falls Church have voted at a clip of 65% for a $120 million bond to build our high school. So I totally understand what that means in the context of tax rates and the like. So as a consequence of that, we worked really, really hard on this budget to come in and really scrub it to get to a place where we have funded, what we're proposing is funding only 1/3 of what we are asking, what we really need. So we are at 33% of what we really need. The other part of that is that of that third of what we need, when we've scrubbed it, when we've found savings, when we found efficiencies, when we found appropriate cuts, we also have a large number to fund of additional money for next year's budget to the tune of about $1.7 million. We've taken care of 35% of that need on the school side. So we are asking our colleagues on the city side to fund 65% of what we actually need, because the other 35% is being taken care of by us scrubbing, by looking at savings and the like. As we go through, and I think about it in 2 ways. I think about the COLA, the increment for our teachers, and I think about the operational side, right? On the operation side, we have things like a school psychologist, a school counselor, an IB PYP coordinator, a special education teacher, a special ed resource teacher, a math resource teacher. All of these positions are absolutely vital to us being able to achieve our goal. And in the end, that 35% that we've been able to find through our scrubbing of the budget takes care of almost 100% of those operational needs. We need $130,000 more plus whatever it costs to fund a COLA to get to our funding for our budget. So tonight, when we share with you, or when Kristen shares with you sort of where we are, I just want to keep in mind that, or help you keep this in mind, that at the end of the day, what we're really asking for from the City Council is what it takes for a COLA, which is $1.05 million, just like they're going to pay the city employees. It's on the general government side. It's fair, right? They're going to pay for them to have a 3% raise. We should get a 3% raise. And then an additional $130,000 to make our budget whole. That 130 could come, if we don't get it, wherever that 130 comes from, we'll have to figure out. But that could be the cost of a school psychologist. It could be at the cost of a teacher. It could be at the cost of a specialist and the like. So we're just asking for fairness and equity in this process. So with that, sort of as a guiding principle for me lately, as I've been thinking about it, I'll turn it over to Kristen for her comments.
So thank you so much. This evening, we just have a few slides that we thought we would go over. Slide 2 has the agenda of the topics that we'll cover tonight, so I'll move straight to slide 3. So when we look at slide 3 again, just as Dr. Noonan had indicated, this budget really was developed with fiscal constraint, truly recognizing the investment that our community has made in our CIP and in the new high school. The budget proposal really reflects the priorities of our school system as outlined in the triennial plan, and the requests that we're asking for in terms of a funding increase from the general government is 2.9%, which would not require a tax rate increase. So when we look, just as Dr. Noonan indicated, that's truly to fund a 3% salary increase for all of our priorities. When we look at all of the requests that we received, they were truly prioritized, and 1.5 million in requests were not funded, which was the 1/3 that we did fund. So when we look at slide 4, this talks a little bit more about that transfer increase. So at the last meeting where we met, we talked about all of the new resource requests, and the one item that we had was for technology, where we had inadvertently included the gross cost in the original and not the net cost. So all of the budget items that you're going to see tonight reflect that change, right? So reducing out the funding that we currently had in baseline, which was just over $19,000. So taking that into account, the requested transfer increase is still 2.9%, no change in the total percentage, and the dollar increase is $1,171,046, right? So that is just $111,500 higher than the cost of providing a 3% COLA for all of our employees, right? So as Dr. Noonan indicated, then all of those initiatives to support our triennial plan were covered through either reductions or realignments from other programs. If we look at a 2% guidance from the city, a 2% transfer increase would provide $820,810. That would leave us with a gap of just over $350,000 from our proposed budget. So if we look at what is that gap equivalent to, right, we could defer items that were in our triennial plan priorities, the psychologist, the special education specialist, clerical support for JTP, the PYP coordinators for Mount Daniel, and Thomas Jefferson, his letters are flipped, the band investment, replacing equipment, etc. It's also equivalent to about 4 teacher positions. Or it would also be equivalent to reducing our COLA to 2.3%. Again, that 2.3 COLA percentage would be below what the general government is expected to propose for their employees, which is a 3% increase.
Just 2 things very quickly as we look at those numbers that sort of pop out at me. One is, just as a reminder to the community, that 2.9% is the lowest increase that the school board has asked for in over a decade. That, to me, reflects the fiscal restraint that this board and our staff has really paid attention to in the context of this budget. The second is, and Kristen just said it, but I want to say it again just to be super clear, is that $820,810 transfer at 2% doesn't even get us to a 3% COLA for our staff. And the general government is planning to propose a 3% COLA for their staff, and a 2% transfer allows them to do that without finding equivalent cuts to what we would need to find in order to do it, because they have fewer employees than we have. It costs the general government 1/3 the cost of a COLA as compared to what it costs us.
So on the next slide, this is data that we shared previously. Since our last meeting, we've added that column for total teacher increase, making it easier to see the total percentage increase that other jurisdictions are proposing for increasing their teacher scales. So for example, looking across that, Alexandria City, that total increase is 2.5%, Fairfax 5.5%. The district that adopted or proposed their budget since our last meeting was Manassas City. Manassas City is also investing in teacher pay, so their combined increase is 7.6%. So the two jurisdictions that have yet to release their proposed budget are Arlington County, which is coming out February 22nd, and Manassas Park City, which is coming out February 28th. So when you can see, in addition to our general government proposing a 3% increase for their employees, the surrounding jurisdictions are also proposing increases for employees as well. So on the very last slide, we have, for this evening, the motions are posted for you to go ahead and discuss and then vote. And we did want to highlight that the city manager's budget presentation is coming up on March 12th. And then also to remind the community that we have 2 upcoming town hall meetings that will be held with the general government as well. And those are on March 18th and April 8th. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Noonan or Ms. Michaels? Ms. Russell?
So, Dr. Noonan, I know that you tend to get some good intel from the surrounding jurisdictions. What are you hearing so far about what you think Arlington might end up doing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've had ongoing conversations with the superintendent, and what I will tell this board and tell the community is that by policy, they're required to offer at least a step. So the superintendent has to put a step into his budget. As we look at the step is roughly 3%. If that's all that Arlington gives, we will still be behind Arlington, even though our salary scale is growing. So there seems to be some lore out there that suggests that if we give a 3% COLA and Arlington gives a step, that we'll catch up, and that just isn't the case. We still won't be able to catch up.
So if I could follow up on that in just a little bit. When we look at Arlington County's cost per pupil as compared to ours, Arlington's FY18, this current year cost per pupil, is $19,340. That compares to our cost per pupil of $18,219. So for FY18, we're $1,121 below Arlington, or we're at 94.2% of their cost per pupil. If I go ahead and estimate what our cost per pupil would be in FY19, assuming this budget proposal is fully funded, our cost per pupil will still be only about 95.6% of Arlington's FY18 cost per pupil, so assuming they have no increase. So you can see even if this budget is fully funded, unless Arlington is making budget reductions, we will still be spending less per pupil than them by a significant amount.
Just to clarify then, so the step increase that they're required to give is the minimum that they would be giving. So there's a good chance they might give COLA on top of that.
There's a chance, yes, but it is the minimum that they're required to do.
Other questions? Mr. Castillo?
I was wondering, Dr. Noonan, if you could tell us how many psychologists we have on staff now?
Sure. We have 2 psychologists on staff, and that equates to about 1 psychologist for every 1,450 students, which is a ratio that is frankly unconscionable to me.
Well, I would just say recently the Washington Post this week had an article talking about staffing of nurses, psychologists, counselors, and the recommendation, according to the National Association of School Psychologists, is 1 for every 500 to 700. Mm-hmm. So it would seem that this is a very real and numbers-based position, the school psychologist addition. And I would say, especially in these times, having somebody like that is extraordinarily important for our students.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And I think Valerie Strauss is the author of that
yeah.
article, and I think that actually came out before Parkland. Just as and then it just was a reminder of how important those positions are.
Mr. Reiniger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions. I admit, Dr. Noonan, I'm a little concerned that I recognize how frugal we need to be. But I was looking at the list of unfunded requests that we've got, and that includes, with very few exceptions, it's teachers and people to serve the students better, including an additional counselor, which would take us more towards we'd actually be within the 500 to 700 per counselor instead of even above it with the addition. And this additional social worker, an assistant athletic director, and of course we've lost some capability there with Mr. Horn moving on. And so, it's a list of things that I don't know how you say are less important than the things that we're trying to do. I'm also concerned that as we look at the chart of salary changes, that essentially 3%, with possibly the exception of, because Alexandria added a step at the top of the scale, and Prince William added a supplemental pay increase, we'd be at the bottom of the scale. And I get that we have teachers that are, because of the efforts the school has made, are at least competitively paid now. But I have to say I'm just worried about losing that and falling back. As Fairfax makes roughly a 5.5% increase, that loses competitiveness relatively quickly, especially given many of our teachers live in Fairfax, and they could teach in Fairfax without driving in traffic. You live that every day. So I don't know that there's a question in there. I'm just struggling with, especially since, what's the estimated city growth now?
The last I heard was 3.4%.
So the estimated city growth is 3.4%, which even on a 50-50 split, if you assume that's the right way to go, which I don't necessarily believe is the right way, that would fund a 3.4% growth in the budget that would let us conceivably pay for a couple of these additional critical positions, or maybe give a step halfway through the year. I'm struggling with saying we're going to come in at 2.9%, given the manifest needs that are clear in the paper that we've got.
I agree.
And I think at the end of all of it, one of the things that we really tried hard to do was to balance the capital program with the operational program, and we ended up making hard trade-offs, and there's no doubt about it. And some of the hard trade-offs in there were really three in particular. One was employee compensation. I would love to be able to give a step and a COLA. That's the ideal. And that's important to employees, and that would set us apart. And the other two areas were the school counselor and the school social worker. We have some definite and unique needs in our community. One, because we're small, and that allows us to know our students better than any other school division that I've ever been in. And the other is, in some ways, we have a fairly transient community. We have international students coming and going. We've got State Department kids. We have diplomat kids. We have kids that have unique needs, and those need to be met. And one of the ways we can meet them is through school counseling and school psychologists or school social workers. So yes, you're right. I am concerned. And what I end up being concerned the most about is what makes us unique, what makes us special. And as I talked with the teachers, a lot of what I heard was, one of the things that makes us special is the personal touch, small classes, and feeling like a family. And if we have to go down a road where we're reducing funding, or reduced funding or flat funding, we're going to find ourselves in a place where there's nowhere to go except to class size or except to compensation. And I think that would fundamentally change who we are as a school division. So all that to say, I agree.
Yeah, like I said, it's less a question when I looked at again, at the list of unfunded requests, the things that leapt out at me were the additional counselor and the social worker, like you, for a number of reasons, and it's, Parkland is a part of it, but it's more than just that. It's that, this is while it's a very accepting community, it's a very high-pressure environment for kids. And, looking at the Pride survey every year, yes, there are drugs and there are alcohol everywhere. It didn't feel to me like we're out of the norm and in some ways better than the norm in a lot of other school districts. But what sets us as apart is we're a very high-stress school district. I mean, it's just, for those of you who have kids in the school system, it is a high-stress environment. Great school system, but, very good performers, a lot of attention to detail and getting the best out of kids, and that, I'll just shut up. I think we need to, the counselor or social worker part needs to be a significant priority. And if we can't afford it now, I think it's got to be a top priority going forward. I'm without forecasting votes, I'm reluctantly willing to go along with this given the need to build a new high school. But we can't, to say that our needs as a school system rise with a growing population and the rising people costs is the same degree as general government without throwing stones at general government strikes me as unrealistic. I hope that soon we can get to a revenue sharing agreement with the city that would eliminate the questions about what's the transfer and the ad hoc negotiation from year to year, so we could have budget predictability and work within what the city's means are. I think that would be advantageous, but that's a topic for the future. Thank you.
Ms. Gill?
So this is kind of on topic, but, so the city's projecting revenue coming in at 3.4%, you said?
That's what I understand.
And we're doing a 2.9% request, so it would leave 0.5%. So I know the city council is concerned about putting money into savings. So does that, and if my math's right, does that allow them to put the equivalent of like a penny or even 2 pennies? The savings, if we, so that,
I don't know.
okay, I don't know if we had that.
The difference between the 2.9% that we requested and a 3.4% transfer increase is about $224,000.
Okay.
About half a penny.
About half a penny, okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to salary scales and where we are, my understanding was that some of the building leadership salaries were lagging and had not been brought into parity with surrounding jurisdictions. Where are we on that project now?
We haven't addressed it in this budget. That'll be something that we're going to have to look at going forward. But we do recognize that there's some parity, particularly with assistant principals.
Parity problems or?
Parity problems.
Okay, so,
Yes.
all right, I just want to be
Sorry,
clear
good-
about that.
Good clarification, yeah.
Any final questions? Just for me, kind of piggybacking a little with Mr. Redinger, definitely seeing some of those parts that we've kind of leaving unfunded for this year definitely give me pause. But I think with where we are trying to get to balancing the capital projects and our operational, I think we've hit the point, I think the best we can of doing that, and I definitely want to thank the staff for doing that. But I think also we definitely have to make sure that in the next budget, we definitely have work to do to make sure that those areas are going to get addressed in years coming budget. But it does definitely give me pause, and I think trying to not necessarily reach out and get to where we need to be of making sure that we are operating. There's a balance, that there's a kind of a hard line that you need to make sure that those areas are taken care of, even with knowing that we have this big capital project of a high school that we need, but we cannot necessarily just forget about the day-to-day things that makes our school special, and why people choose to come to Falls Church for what we have that our school system offers. So we need to definitely, I think the staff has recognized that and make sure that, well, a big part of why teachers are here as well is because we offer that personal touch that a lot of our surrounding counties don't get to do that because they are much larger than we are. So we want to make sure we're competitive in those salaries, and yes, the other parts are important for teachers, but at the end of the day, salaries are important, and we want to make sure that we continue to be competitive because let's face it, our neighbors are recognizing what they have to do as well, because they've been years of not, compensating their teachers in the way that they should have. And as we know, over a 3-4 year period, we had to work hard to try to get some parity as well, and others are now recognizing they need to do the same thing. So we are always going to have to be working hard and keeping an eye on what our neighbors are doing so that we can continue to be competitive with salaries and making sure we do that. I've been on the bandwagon of looking at revenue sharing for years now, and I hope this year, we've done some discussion as a board to ask staff to kind of start looking at ways and coming to that point of at least we've come up here of a proposal sitting over and for the general government folks to take a look at and hopefully get to a point that we can sit down and work together on an actual plan to do this. It's long overdue that we are continually always having to fighting back and forth over, I think, what's important things for both sides, general government and the schools, but we have to recognize we can't just not do what we do to keep our schools up and running. All right. Next on is if there are the budget questions and answers, and I don't know if there were any additional.
We had no additional questions received since our last meeting.
Okay. Since we're here, before we make the next jump, did anyone have any questions or additional questions for Ms. Michael or the superintendent before we move on into action items? All right.
I think we're going to take our picture now.
All right, and we're going to, I was just going to say, we're going to pause now. We're going to figure out what are we going to do with our official photo.
Yeah.
We have
Why?
Where do you want us, John?
Studio? Did you get that haircut just for this picture, Justin?
I just figured, just
Okay.
to look
Look
clean.
snazzy.
Just wanted to get a little shaggy, so.
Seems like a good time.
You go in town, you have like a guy.
Been going to haircuttery for 24 years.
So there's
Feels
just
like-
like, there's this, barbershop that's like in
You get to sit down?
where
Me?
the road
I can
is,
sit in the
what's
room.
that called?
Oh, yeah.
I always feel like,
Yeah.
well, I'm
Yeah,
glad
that's
there's
where
a
Dave's
whole,
been
like,
going, like, since
people
we
my
moved
height
here a
on
decade
this.
ago. And I try and get him to move, like,
Like,
now.
so short. It's like, I'm
Well, my view is to
Six.
find something that
Yeah,
works
but
and you stay with it.
Kristen, that looks good. Whenever he goes, like, he has to go at strategic time, so he doesn't have to wait forever.
Okay, now's the time to stand
No,
up.
it's-
Oh, okay. We didn't know if we were sitters or standers.
They need to move their chairs.
Yeah, do we need to move some of this stuff out of the way?
Should we just wheel these out of the way?
These lights are out, but I'll just use my.
Can we turn them on or they're?
Samsung, just, it'll be
Does
good
it-
glow light.
Do we need to, fell on
Does it come on over there?
Just so,
Oh, so you can see the screen.
This-
Yeah.
Front of
So you
This
can
is
see
when
the
you
screen.
drive your way.
I know.
I can get mine out.
Let's have,
Oh, you need me to move, I'm sorry.
I'm happy to move too.
Somebody arrange us.
Yeah, okay, so let's do.
The leader, take charge.
Okay, that's good.
Want me to move any beverages from the table?
excuse me?
Would you like me to move any beverages?
No, I'll go up above that, yeah.
How's that?
It looks good. What about you?
Finally, I'm not the student.
I'm sorry.
If
Everybody get a little heels game.
we could come up a little bit, so we're not,
Like this way?
everybody take one step, there we go, give a little
Is
dip.
this in the way or are you good?
Heading to the light.
You're a very close family.
And I will take this and make it look like it was a studio. Thank you very much for
It looked
dressing
good.
up.
So Shannon, were you looking at the camera
Was I
this time?
looking or am I like staring into space again? I'm like, we have a thousand trip.
Is that you?
That is
or
yours.
Yeah, I think that's.
Well, that's my extra
Okay.
chair.
There's a
all right.
backup
That's
for
Oh, I
Jared's
didn't
chair.
realize
There we go.
they were all queued up over there.
back of water.
Appreciate that.
Sure. That was easy.
want that hair defuzzy.
We were dreading that all day.
You can't even blame it on the weather. It's just. It's not even raining or anything, right?
It's humid.
It's humid.
I told Dave, I'm like, that air conditioning's going on tonight.
First
No, I
motion
was-
is you.
I was gonna sleep with the windows open tonight.
Is you.
I can read it.
Second?
You'll need to coach us.
Shannon's first.
So next, we're going to move on to business actions and information. And 3.01, approval of submission to city manager of the FY19 operation budget.
This one right here. Sorry, we're making sure I'm in the right place. I move that the school board approve the submission to the city manager the proposed 2018-19 operating fund budget in the amount of $51,039,858, which requires a city appropriation of $42,211,546.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second?
Any discussion before we take a vote?
Roll call?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill?
Aye.
Ms. Litton?
Aye.
Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion passes.
We're going to move on to 3.02, approval of submission to the city manager of the FY19 food services budget.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the submission to the city manager, the proposed 2018-2019 food service budget with receipts and disbursements in the amount of $1,103,600. I can't even say it. You know what I mean.
I
I'm
gotcha.
there.
Thank you very
The
much. Is there a
nerves.
second?
Second.
Second.
All right, thank you.
My first motion.
Ms. Goodell?
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill?
Aye.
Ms. Litton?
Aye.
Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Motion passes.
And then on to 3.03, approval and submission to the city manager of the FY19 community services budget.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Falls Church City Public School Board approve for submission to the city manager the proposed 2018-2019 Community Services Fund budget in the amount of $2,819,126, requiring a total city appropriation of $107,500.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you. Ms. Goodell?
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Castillo?
Aye.
Ms. Gill?
Aye.
Ms. Litton?
Aye.
Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. All right. And on to the 3.04, approval of the final RFP for George Mason High School project. Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you very much to everyone on the dais for your support of the budget. Tonight, we have a really awesome opportunity, I think, to finalize the RFP, and this is the design phase portion of the project for George Mason High School. Before I turn it over to Tricia Minson, I want to thank Tricia Minson, along with Bob Jones, who's in the audience tonight, and William Devan, who is outside counsel, who's been very helpful to us, Sevi Padilla, Kristen Michael, and Lisa High for their incredible work pulling this final RFP together. It was a tall task, and it was done well in a period of time that was quite efficient. So on behalf of the superintendent, I wanted to say thanks to the team for your incredible work. So with that, before we go any further, I do want to turn it over to Tricia Minson to give you some brief updates about where we are. And Bob Jones is also here if we have some questions as well.
Benson?
Thank you. Good evening. We have worked very hard on this and feel very, very good about the final project, the final product. The RFP that was in draft form at the last board meeting on the 13th has had a few tweaks based on some input from the board and the community over the past week. That most notably is in the scope of work. There's the relocation of the Legacy Memorial. There's been an add alternate for 25% power generation instead of just net zero ready, and an add alternate for what it would take to have geothermal heating and cooling available for Henderson when their units go to end of life. The one document that is new is the last few pages of this, starting at page, I believe, 290 of the agreement, or the document. That's the comprehensive agreement that we've spent a lot of time and energy looking at. There's also a second document that's been added on board docs. It's the lead addendum, and that's where what I really wanted to highlight for you all tonight. The lead addendum puts in place what happens if the building doesn't reach LEED Gold, which is the expectation in the RFP, to try to quantify that. Since there's not an easy way to do that, we put in that if the building is LEED Silver, 10% of the private entity's fee would, their fee would be reduced by 10%. If the building is only LEED certified, the fee would be reduced by 15%. And if the building is not LEED at all, it's reduced by 25%, forfeiture of their fee. If their fee in total is, say, $3 million, that would be between $300,000 and, gosh, bad at math here, a big
25% of
25% of 300,000, or 3 million. So it's a lot of money, and hopefully that's enough of an impetus to get us there. We also put in the shared savings as it is right now. If we end up coming into the project below the gross maximum price, and Bob, jump in here if I'm mixing up some of these terms. Right now, the split would be the private entity benefits 25% from what we're able to reduce the price by, 75% coming to the owner, but there's the advantage that if we do reach LEED Platinum, which is above the LEED Gold level, that's the expectation in the contract, or if we're actually net zero as opposed to net zero ready, then the private entity would get 35% of the shared savings. And if the private entity is able to get us to both, which is a huge task, and we don't know if that would even really be possible or practical given these numbers, then the shared savings would be at 50%. So it would be a benefit to any private entity that can get us there, and hopefully that allows us to let the folks who are that you all are going to be discussing for the down select next really have some motivation to know what the priorities of the board are going forward with this project. But we've spent a lot of time going through every line, every word of this. If you have questions, I realize it was a little bit late to get the comprehensive agreement up there today, but we've spent a lot of time doing it. Bob's been wonderfully helpful in it. We also did have outside counsel who actually has been brought in by the city to review all of their contracts for construction and has some great experience and had some really good guidance to allow us to get this contract where it is. And as the comprehensive agreement is written now, and as the RFP is written, of the 3 down selected firms that are going to be proposing their plans for us going forward, they need to point out to us any questions that they have about the comprehensive agreement, any terms that they're not sure of, anything that they would object to at this point, and allow us to have easier negotiations going forward, but also to know what our expectations are when we negotiate that final contract. So while the comprehensive agreement is what the base will be, there's room for negotiation in there. It does include all of the insurance provisions that our insurance would require us to have. That would talk through that with VML and our representative. So definitely feel good about that, but want to answer any questions that you all have about this beast of a document. I know it's a lot of pages to get through.
Thank you very much for all the work that you and Mr. Jones have done getting us to this point. And see if there are any questions from any board members. Mr. Castillo.
Thank you, Ms. Benson. Maybe you and Mr. Jones could talk, as depending on your comfort levels, about with respect to the next steps in the process and especially the lead aspect of this. When would you know what you could get and how much is going to be in process? I assume you nail most of this down before you break ground, and then
Part of their proposal will include their proposed lead score sheet. So they're already going to. So it'll have their proposed lead score sheet, and they're going to show us how they plan on reaching lead gold as part of their proposal. And it's just, it's a process, and nothing is guaranteed until you get to the end, you get all your documents in. But, generally you're going to have you're going to overshoot gold with the points that you propose in case you don't get a couple of them. And, so when you review proposals, you want to make sure that they're not, just at the gold number, that they've got a little room for error in there.
And how much more of a lift is it to get to platinum versus gold? And are there any great new technologies coming around the bend here, or conversely, is the higher price of things like solar panels going to affect what's feasible? Or are we pretty much, we know technologically where we're at?
I think that just the requirement of the geothermal actually gets us, a lot further down the road to gold or platinum just by having that requirement in there. So they complement each other. And I think as far as the efficiency, and then also with all the a net zero ready building is going to be, energy efficient. And a lot of the stuff that you're going to do to get to net zero ready is also going to get you lead to gold or, closer to platinum. So everything that we're requiring them to do is pushing us in that direction already. So it's not unthinkable that they could come up with, proposing lead or reaching lead platinum.
Thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Reiniger?
Would it be possible for you to cover briefly, any additional changes that were made, not necessarily on the last round, but in response to community input?
To the RFP, or I guess that would really be for the scope of work.
Yes.
The main point, do you want to talk
Well,
about the space for?
yeah, I can go through sort of the list that we went through last time. I don't have it in front of me, but there were some changes to, for example, the arts program based on community feedback. There were some changes and modifications specifically around space and size and planning. There were some changes to some of the athletic spaces based on community feedback. We received some feedback around specifically the sustainability aspects. So we made some changes in sustainable landscape. We put in an aspirational tree canopy of 15%, knowing that we're going to have some areas that we're going to be able to tree. We made some changes to the memorial garden that were mentioned earlier based on some feedback. So we do have something in there that speaks specifically to engaging around the memorial garden. Just trying to think of the other big ones that really came out.
Parking and transportation.
Parking and transportation were the big areas that we got some questions about. I don't know how much changed in the RFP based on parking and transportation. Ms. Minson, do you? I don't think anything changed substantively around that. It's still going to be something we're going to have to work through. But the big things were around sustainability, the memorial garden, and the arts.
One other, I know there was a comment that was sent to the board about community use of the facility. And we've been talking for some time, I know in public events, that question has come up, and we've discussed how the building would be designed from the start to be more friendly to community use, especially the fact that the academic buildings would be segregated in an academic tower that would allow for the use of the rest of the facility with fewer security precautions. Is there anything that you, Dr. Noonan, or you, Ms. Minson, or Mr. Jones could share about how that fits in the RFP?
I think that really fits in at the next phase. Once the final private entity is selected, that's part of the discussions with the community and with the board and folks at meetings of what that looks like, what the community asking for, and how to meet those needs. But
And I think we also had that well defined or expressed with the feasibility study, and the parts of the feasibility study that we said that we wanted. And it's I think the teams talked about the need to have that separation so that you keep, you can easily open up part of the school for community while keeping the rest of the school secure.
So let me just pick up on that a little bit further, because as you get those questions, if you will forward them to me, what I'd like to do is I'd like to start collecting names of people that can be part of a community use sort of committee. And some of that can happen even before the RFP, because there's really two phases to community use. One is, what are our community use policies, and is it easy to use our buildings just generally across the system? And if not, how can we improve upon that? And then the other is, what does community use look like in the new high school? So that team could then be utilized for two purposes. So if you'd like to encourage them to reach out to me, I would be happy to start setting something up, to start talking about what does community use look like of our schools.
Just to follow up, I think I forwarded some comments from the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. I think there's a third piece to that as well, and that's the operational workarounds while the high school is in construction, and what sort of bridging we may need to do for various community use programs as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And that raises another point. It's not just community use bridging, but it's actually school programming bridging that we're going to have to do, because if we lose fields during the process, where are we going to play our games, how are we going to work that out, and the like. And so we're figuring all that out as well. Good point.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Anderson.
I don't know if this is a question, Dr. Noonan, for you or Ms. Minson, but there were another question that has come up in the community is trying to clarify, and so maybe clarifying for the community, the design of the school at 1,200 students, the ability to support up to 1,500 students through reprogramming, and then in looking at the statement of work, there is a reference to providing a strategy for future expansion of the high school academic structure should the school continue to enroll beyond the projected 1,500. So maybe if you can clarify a little bit about that.
Sure. The clarity around that is that we anticipate when the school opens and for the next several years that the school wouldn't grow beyond 1,200, but we anticipate in the next 15 to 20 years that it could actually grow to 1,500. The school building itself will accommodate for that. And so the way that that's done through building use is, for example, if I teach English in room 1, I'm teaching class periods 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then someone else might float in and use the classroom for periods 6 and 7. So suddenly, instead of having 5/7 of utilization, you have 100% of utilization of that room. And so when you utilize a building differently, you have programmatic utilization, and then you have actual utilization. And so looking at that through those two lenses, I think will be important. With respect to the other piece, one of the things that we have talked about is if there are significant demographic changes over the next decade or two, that where, just say for example, Amazon decides to put their headquarters out at the Dulles area, the new budget that was just passed that effectively ends sequestration brings everyone back to the DC region for contracting and the like, we could see a boom in population. And if that were the case and we were to grow, I want, and Bob and Tricia want, and we all want, some strategy to say, if we needed to go up a level, is there a way to go up a level or not? And so really what we're talking about is developing some sort of potential infrastructure that would allow us to go up one more level if we had to.
Okay, and a follow-up question on that, some of the strategies for going up a level, does that have any impact on compatibility for Net Zero Ready and for perhaps?
I would presume that it does, because when we talk about Net Zero Ready and think about photovoltaic arrays, you know, those are on the roof. And so we would need to then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what we're asking them to do is show us that they take into account their design, how they would expand the building. You know, what, you know, so that it's easy to do, so you're not just putting on an addition off on a side that doesn't really work with the rest of the building. We want to go into it with a plan where you can put on an addition if you have to, and the building all still works the way it's supposed to. So it's just thinking of how do you do that now so that it's designed to accommodate that in the future.
Thanks.
Any other questions? The one that I had, and that was kind of discussion, so within the discussion of the RFP, of looking at it, are we looking to have the ability to go up of the materials that are potentially going to be used? I know we've talked about that before, and I just want clarification of that, if needing to do down the road.
Yeah, I think the proposers are going to come back with what they think works best with their design. Sometimes going up is difficult. You know, you could, because there's upfront costs now to going up because you have to build the structure in order to support the extra floors. And then it gets a little tricky in construction because you don't want to build on top of an occupied school. So, you know, the proposers may come up with a great idea of how you do that, but it's generally the more difficult way to go. But then the other way, you got to give up some real estate to go out. So, you know, we'll see what kind of creative solutions we get from the proposers.
Okay. Any final questions before motion? If not, I will entertain a motion, please.
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board approve the final RFP for the George Mason High School project as presented.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gill. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Litton. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you very much. All right. Next, we'll move on to approval of the 3 RFP finalists for the George Mason High School project.
Great.
Back to Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to do a quick presentation with some information for the board to give you a sense of sort of what we've been talking about pretty hot and heavily for the last couple of months, and that is the RFPs. I'm very proud to say that we had a really great showing. We had a number of RFPs come back with some really great ideas and some really great thoughts. But before I get into that, I do want to take just a second to thank the committee that were part of the down selection process. I want to thank Wyatt Shields, our city manager, Dan Z from the city council, who was also there. Our own Tricia Minson was there. Russ Wadiska from the planning commission was on that committee. Justin Castillo, thank you, Justin, and Aaron Gill from the school board were also there. And I'd like to also give a special thanks to Jim Wise from the city side, who's our procurement specialist here in the city of Falls Church, who was very helpful in our process, and also Bob Jones, who was extremely helpful in the process of not only helping prepare the RFP conceptual phase, but also helping us with the down select. So thank you again, Bob, for all your support. So let me just talk for a few minutes or less, hopefully, about the committee process. And it was something that I think was, for me, it was a lot of fun because it was with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm that I kind of went into it. But the committee came together to meet with Jim Wise one afternoon. And at that point, he gave us our binders. And so if you can imagine, 5 really thick binders with conceptual phased RFPs in them. He gave us our binders. We signed non-disclosure agreements so that no one would know sort of who was in the pool, who wasn't in the pool. And then we went off on our own and we used a scoring rubric just to kind of keep track of things like were the people appropriately trained? Did they have the appropriate credentials? What were the projects that they had done in the past? What did the budgets look like and their final budgeted amounts or spent amounts on projects look like? And then we all did that individually, and we came back together. And I had scheduled 2 evenings, 2 afternoons, and I told the committee, we can sit here for 2 meetings or we can finish it in 1 meeting. It's up to you. And so we sat in a room, sort of sequestered for a couple hours. And we were right here, and we put up some chart paper around the table, or around the walls, and we talked about each of the proposers, and we shared our pluses and our minuses about each proposal. We started with a little bit of a straw poll. Where does everybody see these proposals? Are you number 1, number 2, 3, 4, or 5? And we did an overall aggregate rating. And then at the end, after we'd gone through each of the proposals, talked about the pluses and minuses, shared information that we knew about each of the proposers, and I felt uniquely sort of positioned because with each of these companies, I've worked with someone that was proposed to be on the team, which was very nice to be able to be in that position. We did another ranking, and at the end, there were 3 that came out as the clear choice. But before I share those 3, I want to share with you just who the 5 finalists were. The proposers were Clark Construction. Clark Construction is planning to team with Mosley Architects. Let me just tell you a little bit about Mosley very quickly, because there's a unique connection between Mosley and the City of Falls Church. Mosley Architecture's one of their principal communicators is Stuart Roberson, and some of you might know Stuart Roberson's name. He was the superintendent of schools here in the City of Falls Church several years ago. So Clark Construction with Mosley Architects proposed. We also had Davis and Smoot, who went in together for the construction, along with Perkins Eastman Architects. We had Gilbane Construction with Stantec and Quinn Evan Architects. We had Grunley Construction with Samaha Architects. And lastly, we had Turner Construction with Fanning Howie Architects. So those 5 were the really top of the heap that came through, and each of them have excellent qualifications to be able to build schools and to be able to do it well and under budget. And trying to down select was not very easily done. And part of the reason it wasn't easily done is because everyone there had such great credentials. But at the end of the day, our finalists were Clark Construction with Mosley Architects, Davis Smoot Construction with Perkins Eastman Architects, and Gilbane Construction with Stantec and Quinn Architects. So what that means now is that those 3 design build firms that are together will receive from us a letter. Actually, it'll come from Jim Wise, the procurement officer, saying that they have been selected as one of the top choices to move forward in this process. They will also be given the RFP on the 22nd in 2 days to begin responding to. And I'll talk about the timelines in just a second. But before I do, I want to just spend a minute talking about each of these. And those, by the way, were in no particular order. They were they were in alphabetical order. But let me just tell you about these finalists and sort of what they bring to our community. One is that each of them, without a doubt, are able to deliver to us a 21st century school. Each of them showed an incredibly creative process and were extraordinarily thoughtful in their considerations as they were moving forward with their proposals, right down to how they were designing interior spaces, what they looked like. And one of the things that I think was a little bit hard for the community was that although they were up on the website, some of the pieces were redacted because they were proprietary. But what I can tell you from the committee's perspective is what we saw in their proprietary portions were pretty extraordinary with respect to their design approach and their management approach. The next is that all of them have proven records of developing pre-K-12 schools. And all of them have built high schools. And that was important to us to make sure that each person that came through had experience building a new high school not just additions, not just renovations, but were really rooted in building new high schools. All of them had records of building on time and on budget, which again was very important to us as we looked at each of these. Each of them came with a solution-oriented mindset to issues and complexities that our site is guaranteed to have. We have a very unique site with respect to the size of it, the design, and how it's going to fit, and the like. And I think that each of these folks came through with unique ideas and solution-oriented mindsets. Each of them had excellent communication strategies and good management solutions. Some of them need a little tweaking just to know our system a little bit better, but each of them had management solutions that were really good. All of them had a depth of knowledge about our project here in one way or another, and they had done their homework and definitely knew what we were looking for and were quite responsive to those needs. And lastly, they all had a deep understanding of how a school site and a commercial site can come together. And that was something that was equally important to us as we were looking at these. In fact, down to the RFP, excuse me, we did say that you had to have an architect on your team that was a commercial person as well. So with that, our next steps are tonight, the RFP. You have approved it. Thank you very much for that. Additionally, on Thursday, the 22nd, the approved RFP will go to those finalists along with a letter from Jim Wise. The completed RFP that you heard about tonight and voted on tonight will be due back on May 17th at 2 p.m., no later. So if you're watching at home, make sure you pay attention to the traffic, make sure you pay attention to where the office is because it may move by May 17th because City Council is currently under the City Hall is under construction. And then the next piece is our final selection is going to happen in the June-July timeframe, and a selection committee around that finalist is to be determined. That hasn't been determined yet. And then the final selection will then complete a full engagement with the architect, and the community will begin in earnest. So that's our opportunity then at that point, once they are named and we have them under contract, to really hit the ground running, take their conceptual idea and their conceptual design and really create what we want to have happen here in the city of Falls Church. So I am over the moon, excited and filled with anticipation with three really good people that I know can do this work and have done this work. I've been in buildings that all three of them have done before. They're all beautiful, but they all have their uniqueness. And I'm excited to flesh that out. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Questions from anyone?
And I certainly would invite Mr. Castillo and Ms. Gill to weigh in with their perspective of the process if they wish.
I don't know that I have a lot to add. I mean, we had 5 great companies come in. They all had strengths and weaknesses. And we think we really picked 3 very strong contenders who will give us a great design for a new high school.
Yeah, I would say I would commend Dr. Noonan for selecting it was kind of like choosing guests for a dinner party. He built a committee that I thought worked very well together and brought some excellent perspectives from various sources. I think it was an example to the community and to our colleagues in general government about working cooperatively on this project, and I hope that sets an example going forward. I thought everybody who was there brought a perspective that made the result of the group that much better. Everybody was well prepared. We had a good discussion, and we worked through everything very thoroughly. And I think the result is, this recommendation to the committee from the review group, I think is a solid one, and I feel very good about where we'll be heading.
Thank you very much. Questions or additional comments? If not, I want to thank Ms. Gill and Mr. Castillo on their being a part of that committee. It's definitely, I'm quite sure, of 5 binders, which I'm sure are pretty thick. a lot of work and reading to do to get prepared and being able to choose those, down select to those final three. I appreciate the work that you all did, Dr. Noonan. Jones, I definitely want to thank you all as well for the work. As again, this process is getting off to a strong start, and that's what we definitely want to make sure that it gets off to a great start at each milestone of this project. So milestone 1 is almost complete, and then we're on to the next one. And again, we know that the community is it's chomping at the bits for their opportunity to give additional input, which they've already started to do. But so we're definitely excited about this project and what's next on the horizon there.
It's like milestone 8.
All right, and with that, I will entertain a motion, please.
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board approve and adopt Clark Construction with Mosley Architects, Davis Smoot Construction with Perkin Eastman Architects, and Gilbane Construction with Stantec and Quinn Architects as the finalists who are eligible to respond to the design phase RFP for the George Mason High School project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. There, second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Reitinger. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. And the final item on the agenda for this evening is to officially appoint the school board members, PTA representative, and FCCEA representative to the campus coordinating committee. We discussed this a little bit during our retreat, just kind of about the membership and wanting to make sure that we officially getting off to the good start with working with our partners in general government and those community representatives that will be part of the group. So we're looking forward to that. This Friday will be our first official meeting of the group. That we, from when I look at the agenda, just kind of be that here's what we're going to be doing over the next number of years for this project. And it's kind of great way to get off the ground there. So with that, if there any other members have any comments about that, this is your opportunity to say so. And if not, I will entertain a motion to appoint the members to the campus coordinating committee.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the school board approve the following appointments to the campus coordinating committee. School board members Lawrence Webb and Justin Castillo, with Greg Anderson as the alternate, and PTA representative Molly Novotny, and FCCEA representative Kristen Sherrard.
Thank you, Mr. Reitinger. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Ms. Litton. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn for tonight? I actually told Clifton that I was thinking we're going to be here later, but I had to text him and say, we actually may be able to do dinner tonight, so it's a good thing. Thank you all very much, and we are adjourned.
Thanks for your work.